wine, music, the color of a wall, the smell of a flower, the weather. I just want this quiet beauty. And I think that if there's something magical about wine, it's that as winemakers, we can find that.
Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hi, from South Central Los Angeles, this is Adam Huss, and my guest for this podcast is Laura Brennan Bissel. Laura is the owner of and winemaker for INCONNU, and that's spelled INCONNU. She built her career in INCONNU and a new project in the Columbia Gorge by following her curiosity, her drive to find an occupation that allowed her to express her innate creativity, and all while being guided by her love of wine. As you'll hear, Laura is beautifully articulate about some of the most important aspects of wine, its ability to inspire and encapsulate our love of life, and its sensual magic that somehow transcends the senses. But these aren't romantic notions to her. They give wine its depth, and she's quick to emphasize the respect and patience that great wine demands. If you have the soul of an artist, if you are a free spirit, if you learn by doing, and if you are driven to create something beautiful and good, then you will definitely enjoy getting to know Laura. She's as much muse as winemaker, and you'll find yourself equal parts inspired and enchanted. Just a heads up, there was a bit of an audio delay in our connection, so at times we talk over each other or there are odd pauses. It's not terrible, but you may notice it in places. As always, thanks for listening. Enjoy. Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for doing this. Welcome.
Thanks, Adam. It's a pleasure.
You are right now in Washington State.
Correct.
And that's kind of a new move for you, right?
Yep, we moved up
in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, we moved up here officially last October, so we've been here for a year. For the year prior to that, I was traveling back and forth very frequently, trying to get things established up here.
Got it.
Yeah, and we're in Washington, but we're just for a geographical point. We are directly across from Hood River, Oregon. We're on the Columbia River. So we're the Columbia Gorge AVA,
nice.
And we're an hour from Portland. So frequently when people hear Columbia River, Gorge, whatever, they think that we're like more up into Washington, but we're not. We're like right across from Oregon.
And is the Columbia, does that AVA span both sides of the river?
Correct. I believe it's the only AVA in the United States that's two states. I think that's correct.
Except for Walla Walla.
Is Walla Walla two states?
What about Walla Walla?
Isn't Walla Walla just Washington?
Yeah, it's Oregon.
No, really?
No, it also well, like the Milton Freewater district is part of Walla Walla, and that's definitely in Oregon.
All right, well, I am totally wrong then. For some reason, I thought that was the case.
Well, at least it seems like it only happens in the Washington-Oregon border.
I am fact-checking you right now.
All right, do it.
And it looks like the proper AVA of Walla Walla, or the town of Walla Walla, is all
the
Washington.
Town definitely is in Washington.
But all right, okay, hold on. I'm just curious.
Do it. That's what I need. That's when this podcast finally makes money,
right.
And I can afford a staff. My first hire is going to be a fact checker who is just going to be
You're just going to constantly take somebody from This American Life or something.
That's right. Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, Milton Freewater is on the Oregon side. Maybe it's that Washington and Oregon are the only states that share ABS. I don't know. Like, it's misinformation I was given at some point, but
hey,
now we both know.
I still think you're special.
Oh, thank you, Adam. I love being wrong because it means you get to learn something, and now I know.
Well, you didn't start your wine career in that area, in the Columbia River area.
That's correct. Yes.
And And you also didn't start your life. You started that down in the Bay Area, if I'm correct.
Nope.
The Bay Area of California, that
I
is.
am not.
No.
I am not from California.
No, 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 no.
Oh,
I know
you
you're
mean
not from California. Did your wine career started in that area though, right? In the Bay Area?
technically? Well, no. I mean, technically, my wine career like the first real wine job I had was at Unti in Dry Creek Valley. Outside of the town of Healdsburg.
Oh, okay.
My wine interest started when I lived in the Bay Area. I mean, I was interested in wine, I would say, from a very young age, but I had no ability to like accumulate information about wine or become a wine centered person. And then I made a
Just more the
friend.
drinking aspect.
Yeah, exactly, and pretty un uninformed drinking. But it wasn't until I lived in
Just a-
Barcelona when I got like really, really, really into wine, and then moved back to California to do an internship.
Nice. All right. What is that? What brought you to California? An internship in wine?
No, I had lived in California before I lived in Spain. What brought me to
Okay.
California was I was looking for a different life, and I mean the first time I came here or there was with the option to do like a tattoo apprenticeship with a friend of mine at the time, and I mean I did that for all of 2 or 3 months, and then I just worked in bars and restaurants and rode my bike a lot, went to a lot of shows, and just enjoyed, for all intents and purposes, a small part of my early 20s, living the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area life at that time, which was very different than what it is now. So yeah,
Nice.
that
Yeah.
was I came out. I moved here when I
But
was
did you have
22, I believe. um,
to California
Yes. And then
and
went, kind of just hung out basically. And met a winemaker at a beer bar I used to work at, and that was the first time it really hit me that you could just be a winemaker. Like that was, not in the in the like Rolodex of job options that I had ever been presented with, kind of like equestrian or interior designer were all things that I was just like, well, I'll never be that, I won't even think about it. But yeah, I met a winemaker, and we clicked, and I learned, it was like the first person I met in that field, and I went up after I had gotten off work. He was young and handsome, and I sat down next to him and introduced myself, and we started talking. And he ended up being a kosher winemaker as well. He was like an Orthodox kosher winemaker, and this was the day after Passover. And yeah, we became friends, and I learned, that was like the first person I met where I actually like learned about wine from him. And I learned about Tannat, and I learned about the Northern Rhone and the Southern Rhone, and drank probably the first like really good wines I had gotten to drink, and it was an obsession from then on.
mm,
I remember the first Gaillot, and the first like wine I drank from. I, it's so funny to think about it now, but it was like a Gigondas was like the first wine that I was just like, oh, what is this? Um, yeah.
hey, that's a good wine. I mean,
Oh, a
if you
good
get the right
Gigondas is
one, the
incredible.
right
Absolutely, yeah. This was one that I'm
yeah.
blanking on the name of the house, but it's one that Charles Neal brings in, and it was right in that $20 mark, where that was a whole lot of money for me to spend on a bottle of wine at that time, but it was a really good bottle of wine for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. How much did you buy? Just one bottle?
No, I mean, I would try and save up my shekels and go back and buy more bottles. But I was also trying to learn, so I wasn't buying the same bottle of wine over and over again. I would try
Right.
something from Larocque, because once I got interested in wine through my friend Jonathan, There was a little wine shop in Oakland that I'd go to called Vino on Piedmont Avenue. And there was this one guy who worked there named Perry, and he was like the only person in any fancy wine shop who was nice to me. I mean, I went into all these other shops that now sell my wine, but at that time, I would get looked at like I was going to steal wine, and they'd be like, the $10 bottles are at the front. But this guy Perry, he he noticed that I was like coming in and kind of like systematically drinking through the Southern Rhone, and buying the wines from the Northern Rhone that I could afford. And he started talking to me about it and telling me, which wines were the better buys and which I would really like. And, through him and Jonathan, I really got my first kind of like introduction into what fine wine was, and, small producer wine, and, coincidentally low intervention wine to a certain degree at that point. Obviously not crazy natural wine, but just, real wine, a lot of stuff from Kermit Lynch and
Yeah.
Charles Neal and Bone Imports, and, kind of the classics that you find in the Bay Area.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was the transition then? Where did that interest take you? Where did the path lead you at that point?
I mean, it's kind of like a crazy winding path, but from there, let's see, not long after that, I was riding my bike to like one of my 4 jobs in the Bay Area. And I was hit by a car. It was a van. It was a San Francisco mobile patrol van.
Wow.
And they got me pretty good. And, I was riding a track bike at the time, and they ruined my bike and my shoulder. And at that moment, a gentleman walked up to me and said, "I saw everything." And I was like, "Well, thank God." And then he handed me his business card, and it said, "Eric Rappaport, San Francisco District Attorney." And I was like, yes. Because
Wow.
having had been a bike messenger in my early days, along with a million other bottom tier jobs, I had been hit by a car a few times and had people do things like come and make sure I wasn't dead and drive away, or like talk to attorneys and be able to get nowhere. But at this point, I was like, okay, I will at least be paid for my injuries and my broken bike. And
Right.
yeah, so this is kind of like here nor there, but when I was very young, like before I dropped out of high school, I worked for an attorney as like a paralegal. I had wanted to be a lawyer when I was much younger, and I had been offered to read the law in Virginia. So I was, working for a lawyer. I was familiar with writing motions and whatnot and filling out, some legal paperwork, even though paperwork is basically my biggest nightmare. But I was able to fill out my own, complaint and filed against the city, and they settled with me like really quickly, actually. I wasn't trying to get a ton of money. I just wanted to pay my medical bills, fix my bike, and have some extra cash. So they settled with me, I think, for like $18,000, and it left me with like $5,000, which was more money than I'd ever had. And so I decided to go travel, and I booked like a trip and went to Southeast Asia. So I did like Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. And then I went into Nepal for a couple of months and down into India, and, did the Annapurna circuit and like did all these things that like I had for like where I was in life and what my life was, and, what my capacity was, and, what my privilege was at that point, was not the person who got to go do the Annapurna circuit or, backpack through India or anything like that. I just happened to be hit by a car, and the person who happened to see it happened to be honest, and also happened to be a lawyer for the same city of the person, of the person driving the vehicle. And, instead of, blowing it all, partying with my friends, which could have happened when I was younger. I had a roommate at the time. I lived in a warehouse in West Oakland, who had traveled some, and, he and I, it's funny, we never really got along. And when I was trying to figure out what to do, and I think it's probably just because I was an annoying 22-year-old, who played my music too loud and was disrespectful and lived in a warehouse with a bunch of older people. But when that happened, he was like, "You should travel." And I was like, huh. I should travel. I'd always wanted to do it. I had gotten a passport, but I'd never left the country, and I did it. It was wonderful advice, and that trip changed my life. And kind of throughout my whole life, I've always enjoyed writing. And on that trip, I wrote these little like kind of vignette stories, about what I was doing and who I was with, and they were pretty funny and interesting, because I was in interesting places. And I think because I had come from such like honestly a bit of a polarizing background. I mean, interest not included, but my life up until that point was not a charmed experience. It was hard for me to travel by myself, but it was really good. I had to learn how to communicate with other people who had completely different backgrounds than me. I had to learn how to become friends with pretty much anybody, and it was a wonderful experience. Yeah, so from those stories, I was offered a job in PR and marketing in the bicycle industry. I'd always been really into bikes. So it was a good fit for me. And I took, I had to like Google what PR and marketing were. But I took the job,
how
Sorry?
how did you get your stories out into the world? What did you do with them?
Oh, I like posted them on MySpace and, sent them in emails.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
Nice.
I mean, I wasn't even capable of making a blog at that point, like had I made a blog, I mean, maybe, maybe it would have been more fortuitous for me, but no, I did, I just sent them to my friends. And
Yeah.
the guy who, owned the PR and marketing bicycle company was a friend of mine, and, just kind of a casual acquaintance. And,
That's-
yeah. And,
just saw some talent and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think he just thought I was good at telling stories and or communicating through words. And yeah, so that was like my first entry into any sort of credible job that required some skill. Um, and then
Nice.
from there, let's see, I did that for about a year. Maybe a little longer. And at the same time, I had started like my own little kind of nonprofit through that called Art Bike, where, at these big events that we'd be promoting or, running the press office for, I'd put on like a bike and art collaboration, and, usually with like a big party and just kind of like a community building event. And yeah, I mean, that was a good experience. And I basically, though I was having fun doing that, realized there was no future in it, as far as like having the satisfaction that I think I need in life. And the financial security. I mean, because basically I was just living in poverty, but like glorified poverty. And I was touring with my friend's black metal band at the same time too, just to make some extra cash and get to see the country, which was also a good experience. But yeah, I still just I hit a point where I was like, I need to learn more about something more complicated and interesting. And to me, that was wine. So I like very haphazardly decided that I was going to fly to Barcelona and ride my bike into France and find a winery that would let me intern with them and pick grapes and all that stuff. And I got to Barcelona with my bicycle and had a lot less money than I should have had, in my plans. And, I had a couple $1,000 and was supposed to be in Europe for like 4 months. And, the cold, hard reality that Europe wasn't as cheap as, Cambodia set in really quick. And, yeah, so I ended up just kind of like flailing in Barcelona for a couple of weeks and found my footing. And yeah, I just, I had a boyfriend slash fiance there for a while who was also really into good food and good wine. And, he and I explored a lot of the culinary scene of Catalonia. And I created a job teaching English in La Boqueria to chefs, and basically, like sat at Pinocho and ate chuchos and drank cortados in the morning, or, hung over capipota and talked about food and wine and walked around the market. And it's funny. I mean, I am terrible at languages. I'm just kind of like an overall like dyslexic person, and that makes learning languages and doing spreadsheets and all things that are that side of the brain very complicated. But I can tell you the name of tons of mushrooms in Catalan. So, and fish,
That's awesome.
and odd vegetables, heirloom beans. But yeah, it was just, again, my fiance at the time and I, granted, I think it was one of the most intellectually stimulating and fascinating and wonderful times of my life and relationships I ever had.
I imagine when you came back, you were sort of aflame with new ideas about how making your life something like that.
You mean when I came back to the States?
To the States, yeah.
Well, I mean, I came
Yeah.
back to the States to learn to make wine. Like I was undocumented in Europe,
Got it.
and I maybe could have found something, but I had been I had made a friend with a woman who ran a wine shop near me who was like super into like really, really natural wine, and she was very, very, very intelligent and an excellent taster, and we became good buddies, and I told her that I decided I wanted to learn to make wine, and then I was going to move back to California and find an internship, to which she told me that I was absolutely fucking crazy, that I had no experience and that nobody was going to give me a job. And sure enough, a few people wrote me back and, seemed interested in giving me jobs, to a resume that was 100% bogus. And, anybody who knew anything about wine, I should frame that resume and put it on my office wall one day. It was so bad. And I don't know. I think people just thought it was interesting, maybe. I mean, this was back when most of the people who were doing winemaking internships were Davis students or, traveling from abroad, from winemaking families, et cetera. Like, it's funny to think that, only 10 years ago, it was a very different scene, there obviously were people who didn't
How
have.
has it changed?
I mean, I think that now it's like, and anybody wants to go learn to make wine. Lots of people are making wine, and I think it's just this kind of, I would say, largely like idealist, social media driven, micro entrepreneur aspirational thing that just has taken every single human being on the planet right now. And
Oh, interesting.
and
Okay.
I think that it's great if you want to learn to make wine, you should learn to make wine. But it's not like you learn to make wine and then instantly you're a winemaker and you get to to reap the benefits of that. I mean, not that you will be a winemaker if you make wine. That's what you are. But there's so much more to it, and it's a lot of grit. That's required, I think, to actually make it as a winemaker, and patience. And it's funny because I think that the thing that brings a lot of people into wine right now is an idealization that comes from everything being visible, and people get to look at what winemakers' lives look like on Instagram, and they're like, oh, that looks nice, but you don't see the other side of it, and you don't understand that it's not this instantaneous thing where the square picture just pops up on a screen of something beautiful and that's a winemaker's life. It's like, no, there's like 10 years that probably go into making that picture happen, or 5 years that grow into growing that vine, or who knows like what the idealization is, or 18 months that go into aging the wine that you see the picture of, plus tons of hours of trying to understand the financials of all of that. And and I just think that it's like that where we are, fashion, everything like that, it makes sense, to be monetized and marketed and spread rampantly and rapidly. But wine, I think, is like the antithesis of that. It's this thing, there's young wine that you drink fast and it's fun, and I get that and I like that. But there's also this like long, intentional process of learning, and trying to make something the right way, like even getting to know a vineyard. It's like a person. I mean, it takes years to really understand a vineyard and how the grapes are going to respond to you and how they'll respond to the vintage and, and all of these other variables. It's not just fast.
Yes.
There's nothing fast about it. Even fast wines, to make them well, require skill.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right. It's that whole like a 10-year overnight success kind of idea.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is really something that, I've been making wine at a small level for years, but even just moving to a bigger level where I'm trying to make things naturally. I think that's the other thing. When you add in wanting to make natural wines, your intentionality in the vineyard, your knowledge of the vineyard has to increase, because that's really your only control, is when you pick the grapes and how well they're grown, and
I
what
don't.
kind of,
I'm not what people would have called natural wine 10 years ago. I would say I could fall into that. The kind of extreme policing of what the term natural wine means now, I want nothing to do with. So, I mean, yes, like controlling how I grow
no, that's good. Yeah.
my grapes.
And I didn't mean to.
No, I'm not taking any offense to it at all. I just feel like it's something that I should articulate. I'm not offended at
Yeah,
all.
no,
I'm
and I
never
didn't mean to
offended
imply that.
when somebody who loves wine calls my wine natural wine, as long as they also are drinking good wine and not just like mousy garbage that's volatile and disgusting. And then they're like, her wines are natural wine, and I'm like, what did I
Yes.
do? How did I fuck up that wine? I just
Yeah.
the term has.
No, and I didn't even mean to imply that you were making natural wines. I just, just talking about that need to know the vineyard becomes even more extreme when when you remove some of the tools that you could play with in the winery.
I love sulfur.
But yeah, go on. I would love to hear.
I love sulfur. I think it's great.
Hey.
I don't use much of it. I mean, but that's that's after learning.
You don't need to.
You don't need to if you use it correctly. I think that in that I feel like a lot of people feel like, like I did the whole, only 30 parts at bottling. I mean, I think that's hilarious. Like, I think that's the absolute wrong time to put in most of the sulfur. Because you don't know what it's going to do. Like, unless you're like a very skilled enologist, who can do the math and figure out exactly what's going to stay there. And most people who are talking about only using 30 parts of bottling are also not trained enologists who are doing that math. Or you don't have to be a trained enologist, but it's antithetical of the philosophy. Sulfur is a wonderful tool for preserving things and for shutting down, essentially stuff that you don't want in your wine. And if you put it all at the end, you're basically putting it all in at the end when it's going to shut everything down right before you put a fucking cork in it, which makes no sense to me. Like, the job of the sulfur for me is to protect my wine while it's aging. And then when I put it into bottle and put the cork in, I want the lowest amount of free sulfur I can possibly have to bottle, to bottle safely. But to have a beautiful wine that's left to age, without being encumbered by trying to metabolize this like higher dose of sulfur. So I'm on the little bit of sulfuric crush and a little bit of sulfur after mallow. And if you do that appropriately, frequently, you can bottle with less than 30 parts total, anyway, like the last thing I want to do is talk about sulfur. But I think it's an interesting, polarization. And then, the other thing that I believe as a winemaker is that my job is actually to make really good wine. It's not to participate in any sort of dogma around it. Like, the only dogma, which isn't even dogmatic, because I think if you were to tell me that my vineyard was going to die overnight if I didn't make an intervention I wouldn't enjoy, I probably would make the intervention. Fortunately, it doesn't usually play out like that. But if I had any sort of thing that I was my soapbox in wine, as far as like nuts and bolts, it would be farming and, obviously organic farming and farming with as little disruption of the soil as possible. And farming for an ecosystem, not a monoculture. I think that
You,
anybody who's on this earth right now who is, working with the soil or in an industry adjacent to that, like most wineries in California are vineyard adjacent, they're not vineyard owning or vineyard farming. And I feel like if you're not completely concerned and panicking about like what is happening to our environment, then it's like, I don't even tell me. I don't even want to hear it. Like if you can tell me you made great wine, and I'll be happy to hear that, and I'll taste your wine, but don't tell me that you're like doing anything good for the environment or for people.
yeah, no, I couldn't agree more about the dogma. I feel exactly the same. I think the dogma, the main dogma I have is in the farming, and about the same as you. And we pretty much agree completely on that. Now, I think we jumped ahead though, so I just want to steer you back. How did you get some formal training eventually, or was it all
No,
in
I just did a couple
internships
internships. Like
and things like that?
I did an internship at Unti,
Great.
and then the next year, my friend Jonathan, the kosher winemaker, who I stayed friends with, helped me make my first
Uh-huh.
barrel of wine. And basically, with no, like I had no money at all, and kept making excuses of why I couldn't make wine. And he, bought me a half ton of grapes and gave me a barrel and let me make wine in his winery, which was incredibly kind.
That's great.
And
No excuses.
yeah, I guess exactly. And I think that from a lot of people, I got the attitude that I had like somehow jumped the line. And I was like, well, the only, like, I know myself, and I knew that the only way I was going to learn to make wine was if I actually made my own wine and started to understand it that way. And then the
Yeah.
following vintage, I interned with Matthiasen, primarily doing vineyard stuff, and, really got to understand farming and vineyards on a much deeper level, and, kind of went down that rabbit hole. So that's how I ended up
Well,
making wine.
that's so. Did that inform some of your vineyard dogma working with Matthiasen?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that Steve is a wonderful person to inform all types of dogma. Like
Yeah.
Steve is the person who kind of pulled me out of winemaking dogma. I mean, the first half ton of wine I made, I was very like, oh, I don't want to use any sulfur, and like super 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 wooey about it. Thankfully, I ended up putting some sulfur in because my friend Jonathan basically was like, "You're going to ruin your wine if you don't put sulfur in it," and I was like, "All right, fine." Um, and you know, the next year when I was making wine, Steve kind of gave me a few examples of different types of wine and was like, "What kind of winemaker do you want to be?" you know, and I
Right.
wanted to be a winemaker who made wine that I would want to drink, and that's what I chose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't,
Nice.
I've
And so,
never
what is that kind of wine?
inoculated. I The kind of wine that I want to drink. I mean,
Yeah,
I like a lot
and that
of.
you make.
Okay. I like a lot of different wine, and that's obviously changed over time. I would say that when I was younger, I liked, young, fresh wine. I mean, I appreciated more intense, structured wine as well, but, young, fresh wine was probably what I drank the most of for economic reasons as much as, consumptive levels reasons. Um, I would say at this point, I always tell people I like Cabernet Riesling, Longue Nebbiolo, and Grower Champagne. Like that's like my instantaneous, don't have to think about it answer. Obviously,
Hey, yeah.
when I can, I like to drink some more beautiful wines. When Burgundy is accessible to me and I get to drink a good bottle of Burgundy, I love it, of course. Um,
Sure.
just like, I really love some of the more traditional, like old school, like Philip Tony style, Cab Sauv from California. But I think that if I were to try to summarize the type of wine that I usually like to drink, it would fall right into the wine that I usually like to make, which is I like to make wine that is not the loudest thing in the room. And I like to drink wine that is not the loudest thing in the room. I think there's something that happens or has happened, at least to me, as I've gotten older. And, not that I didn't always enjoy these things, but I wanted more diversity, I suppose. But the older I get, the more I want something that's just plain good, be it food or, any sort of sensory experience, wine, music, the color of a wall, the smell of a flower, the weather. I just want this quiet beauty. And I think that if there's something magical about wine, it's that as winemakers, we can find that in such a sensory ample, like a just this symphonic experience for our senses, the way it looks, the way it smells, the way it feels in your mouth, the way it tastes. And I love that, I guess. So for me, wine has an intensity. To me, good wine has a lot of intensity and a lot of energy, but it's tamed. It's like a really powerful horse that moves beautifully and calmly, or like I don't know. I don't know how much of a music person you are, but like Shostakovich. Like for me, I can never be able to say his name with the correct intonation, but he's one of my favorite composers. And I love his symphonies, but for me, my favorite pieces by him are just like quartets, and they're long and they're quiet and they're slow, and it'll hang on the cello for 30 seconds on the same note, but it's like the intensity and the vibration and the vibrance of that it's overwhelming, but it's just one instrument. And I think that's what I want in anything at this point in my life, is just the simplicity of like a 30-second moment of the closest you may be able to get in your life to perceivable perfection, which is thusness, which doesn't last. It's just enjoying a moment. And if I could collect as many beautiful moments as I possibly could and put them into a chamber, I would want to. And, hopefully that will be what my cellar is one day.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
I hate to bring it back to the mundane because that's poetic and beautiful. I want to ask how you try to do that. Like, what are you doing in the vineyard? What are you doing in the winery to try to achieve that?
I mean, the most knee-jerk answer to that is I'm learning.
I think that's fantastic and more profound than people who hear that might understand, right? It's knowing that it is a constant state of learning, right? Like you are, that's the expertise is learning that you're learning, I think. And to some degree, it's like you said, you already mentioned like how many years it takes to understand a vineyard and how it reacts to different things.
Well, I mean, it said 3 years to understand making a wine from a vineyard. But I think to really understand a vineyard is just to be there every day and see it and, participate in its life, like anything else.
So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm as hands off as I possibly can be. But when it's time to make a decision or make a move, I do it quickly and I don't beat myself up about it. I would say that's how I make wine, and it's how I'm learning I farm. Even with livestock, like I have a goat that has an abscess right now because my dog scratched it because he's big and he's a puppy and she's little and she's a kid. And, and in trying to deal with that it's the same way I dealt with it when my daughter had an abscess on her finger and she was, not even a year old. I did not want to give her antibiotics, and I don't want to give my goat antibiotics, but I had penicillin sitting in my fridge for my daughter, just like I have penicillin sitting in my fridge for this goat. And if I'm unable to lance and clean this abscess enough so that the goat learns, body learns to heal itself, and it gets to the point where it gets a fever or anything like that, and that I may kill an animal with my own stubbornness, I won't do that. I'll shoot penicillin into its leg for 4 days until it gets better. But,
Yeah.
I'm going to try and give it the opportunity to heal itself, through making sure it's out of the rain and it's getting enough clean water and it's eating enough alfalfa and it's like getting all the things that a little goat needs, but it's like, I think that a vineyard is the same thing. I mean, it's an organism. And I think that most organisms, if
Yeah.
you give them the right environment and the right food and attention, they will try to thrive. I mean, like the vineyards I inherited up here in Washington, I've been, they were pretty sick when I got them. So it's a lot right now of just, trying to give everything the opportunity to thrive, the best opportunity I can give it, but culling when necessary. And I don't plan on planting until I get to an equilibrium where I feel like most of the things that are going to go on them by themselves, we've removed, and most of the things that are strong enough to fight will stay, and then we'll introduce new organisms.
Yeah.
Um,
You started in California, right? You
mhm.
started INCONNU is the name of your thing. Did I pronounce that
Yep,
correctly?
INCONNU. Yep.
INCONNU. How long did you do that in California before you moved north?
So my first vintage was 2012, and then
Okay.
I moved up here last year, but I took over this project more formally in the winter of 2019, but started making wine from this vineyard
Gotcha.
in the fall of 2018. The people who bought the two
Got it.
properties up here are old friends of mine. And, the husband in particular watched me really starting Kanu out of nothing. Like I was working at a little wine bar in San Francisco. I mean, I had this aspiration of having a winery, which was nothing short of insanity at that point, with my lack of money and lack of experience and lack of knowledge. But I was pretty determined that I was going to do it. And again, it was, one of the many situations in my life where most people were like, there's no way you're going to pull this off. And, Ryan, of Ryan and Melissa, my partners, was just kind of like, I think you'll do it. I think you're going to do it. And, that meant a lot to me at that point in my life. I didn't, I've always had a few people in my corner, like really solid people who've believed in me, friends, whatnot, not family or anything like that. But to have, somebody like he had
Well,
done, like to have somebody, who I didn't know that well, but also knew had, been a successful person, put a, like to tell me that they believed in me and that they thought I could do it meant a lot to me at that point. And, we always kind of kept loose touch. And in 2018, he asked me if I wanted to make wine from his vineyard up here because he had bought a couple of vineyards. And I was like, well, sure, but I need to see them. And we flew up and
right.
drove out to the vineyard. And I remember getting out of the car and just like being like, yep, this is it. This is where I want to be. I've always been inspired by kind of extreme climates. I don't make a ton of white wine in California because I don't think the climate's right for it, but I drink more white wine than anything at home. And this is like a dream appellation, or, in particular, the mountain I'm on for white wine. And
Mm,
I just, I was, I was in love. I mean, I got out in the middle of this overgrown vineyard and looked across, and Mount Hood just stares at you, with all these pine trees around. And, it's very much an
yes.
alpine region, 1,400 feet, volcanic soils. Everything's dry farmed because we have considerable rainfall. It's very unlike most
Yep.
U.S. wine regions. Um, and I fell in love. I made the wine. The 2018 wine I made came out beautifully. And, once we got a little bit through in barrel, he and his wife asked me if I wanted to partner and come up here and basically gave me the opportunity to build, the infrastructure, like farm, winery, vineyard, single thread operation of my dreams. So that's what I'm up here doing. I'm building a
That's
winery in the
fantastic.
spring, and we're looking into properties where we can, either buy a space and refurbish it, or build a space to have a kind of restaurant concept that would be mainly like a prefix meal a few nights a week with our wines, and then maybe a somewhat of like a tasting room, small snack option a couple days a week, and then a soup kitchen a couple days a week. A big, very important thing to me is having some type of food justice involved with whatever I'm doing, as well as treating employees well. I think that I'm going through a very strong kind of paradigm shift of, in California, I tried to make really affordable, high quality wine. And I feel like I was able to do that, but at a loss only to myself, where, for the quality of wine I think I've been making, I sell it, I make a profit, but it's not, but for me to really grow that into something that would be, like worth it, I guess, for all the hard work, I would have had to get a lot bigger than I wanted to. And that's not what I wanted to do. So what I've decided I want to do. So for me, it's like, instead of trying to have this affordable product and, create this equality in wine, which was a big principle for me. I mean, I wanted to have wine that anybody could buy, and, it wouldn't break the bank, and they could drink good wine and not have to worry about, spending their whole paycheck. Instead, I think I've come to the conclusion that the way that I can actually give back is much more simple. And it's, by, we dedicate a certain amount of time each week to, to growing food and to having animals. And, we have a free food stand at the bottom of the mountain that people can come get stuff from our farm from, or, other people have started putting groceries and things from their farm on it, which has been wonderful. I'm working on setting up a temporary soup kitchen with a couple other businesses nearby, just mom and pop restaurant type businesses. And then hopefully once we get our own space, we'll operate our own soup kitchen situation. And, I'd love to have something where we can offer, people who don't have food security, a beautiful meal here and there, not just like ugly chili in a bowl, in a styrofoam cup, and, a cup of orange juice, but, like a...
It's funny, you and I have so many similarities in the kind of things, the way that we think. It's almost eerie. But I've been struggling with the same kind of conundrum of wanting to make wine from that perspective of like social equity, where, it's affordable for anybody, especially because I believe in the values behind the wine, the organic viticulture. I want that to be accessible to everybody, not just to people in the upper middle class and above categories. And yet, you and I both know the costs, especially at a small level of making wine, make that nearly impossible to do all that and then still be able to run a sustainable business. Which, if we want to do good, that has to be part of it. We have to be able to survive and actually have a successful business. And I love your approach. I think that, maybe taking the focus away from the wine and what you can do around the wine, and, let the wine fund some of these other ventures is actually a really great idea. Let me ask you some details about INCONNU. Are you going to keep that name now that you've moved?
No. This is a completely different project. I mean, I'll probably keep making a small amount of wine for INCONNU in California, but I'm definitely not interested in having a large production business in California while I'm doing this up here. I'll mainly just make wine from vineyards that I lease and are being farmed the way I believe in.
How big was your INCONNU production? How big is it, or was it
I was
at
about
its biggest?
5,000 cases.
Oh, that is very good size.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not huge. It's still a boutique small winery,
right?
20,000 case boutique winery,
right?
But no, I mean, it was a healthy size winery. It's what I wanted. It's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, no, that's my goal. I'm far below that, so that's why I think it's a good size. What was your retail price for your bottles?
A lot of my wines were $21 to $23 retail. And then, I had some that were around 28. And then, as I've been able
Yeah,
to
that's great.
gain a reputation and also realize that for fruit that I'm, paying more money for and that I'm aging for longer, I had some wines that were in the $40-$50 range. And then what I will be doing is moving to having wines that are probably between $40 and $80 range, but only working with vineyards that I hold the lease on and I'm farming to my specs. Because
Nice.
I actually, interestingly, like in most scenarios, don't believe that you can, in particular in California, make affordable wine not to a loss of somebody. Like if you're really thinking about
Yeah.
every step of the
Yes.
way, like somebody's losing for you to be able to have an affordable bottle of wine. And I think that that's
Yeah.
probably, if we really start thinking about how all employees are treated, be it, who's picking your fruit or, who's exchanging the posts in your vineyard or,
Yep.
who's putting, stacking the boxes when you're bottling. If you really start to think about that on a broad spectrum in Europe, it's probably just as bad, if not maybe worse. Like it's like,
Oh
there
yeah.
are definitely wineries where there's affordable wine and, sure, no one's being abused, but it's like, are they actually being paid a livable wage and, whatnot? And I think that
Right.
unfortunately, frequently the answer to that is no on large scale projects.
Yeah. I mean, I'm shocked, if you move from a place like I don't know exactly where you were getting your grapes, but if you move to like Central Valley, California, the price is just like, how is that even possible?
No, I mean,
For,
it's
how do you even
terrible.
pay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's fascinating. So one thing that we talked about was the fact that you pretty much were completely distributed, no direct to consumer sales
Hmm.
for those 5,000 cases. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, like very little. Like basically, somebody has to bother me for me to do DTC. Um,
Right, right, right. Hey,
um,
I'll give you cash
yeah,
and come to your house.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. That's yeah, yeah.
so how did you manage that? How did you get that set up? And what's the secret to doing that? Because I want to do that.
I mean, you make a lot less money, but you also don't have to have as many
Right, right.
employees. You don't have to send out marketing emails all the time. You're not as much a slave to being a salesperson. Granted, you do have to travel a lot and, you have to meet your salespeople in different markets and build relationships. I mean, I think that that's like this is going to sound so pompous and so nerdy, but I really like to play chess. Like I love to play chess. I hadn't played in years actually until very recently, and I've been playing like fanatically. Anybody who I can get to sit and play chess with me, I will play chess right now. I used to play probably 10, 15 games a week when I was younger. Um, and I think that business to me, like the thing that I keep coming back to over and over again, is that business is chess, not checkers. Like you're not in a rush to do everything super quickly and get your pieces all over the board. It is strategic, it is slow, it is patient, and I suppose that it's not like the place where it diverges from a chess analogy is that it shouldn't be adversarial. Um, I think that it
Mm,
is so
right.
we are a relationship business.
Yeah.
And not everybody has to like you, but it's important for people to respect you. So if you treat people respectfully, whether they're the CEO of a company or, the person scrubbing the floors or doing the dishes at a restaurant, and you treat everybody well and like a human and equally, and then you do business appropriately, people like working with you, even if it's difficult sometimes. And that relationship is frequently honored. Not every single time, obviously. But I have found that if you build your alliances strategically, but with virtue, not just for marketing success.
Manipulation or
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, it's like sometimes you have to break up with somebody who you really like, but it's just not going to work,
Yeah.
and you do that respectfully. Like there's people who I've professionally worked with that I don't work with anymore who are still confidants and good friends of mine. And I think that that's, to me, more important to a certain degree than just like making a friend. And that, I think, is how distribution has worked for me on a broad scale, is I've been able to build alliances and and really these are friendships, and beyond friendships. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I was given early on was actually from Steve Mathiasen when I was talking about working with distributors. And, I was having this big internal conflict over who I was going to pick to be my first distributor on the East Coast. And Steve told me that distributors are like marriages, and you don't pick the person that you just want to hang out with. You pick the person who's going to like do a good job. Not that you don't want to hang out with the person you marry, but like it,
I was like, wait a minute.
You don't marry the person who, like you have the torrid, bottle throwing, fighting, screaming off balcony relationship with. At least you shouldn't, probably, but it may be fun,
right.
But it's not.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that was just a really, really important thing for me to hear early on. And I repeat that to myself all the time in business relationships. And, I've had to leave a couple distributor relationships over the past year and a half, but most of the ones that I've left and moved on from, it's continued to be a good relationship. There's been no hostility, nothing. That's not every single one, but, it's just, I think you just have to be cautious and you have to trust your gut. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's a certain level of instinct that's required for any business, any person who's doing business. And if you don't have that instinct, you're probably not going to be a good business owner. And you may be very good at helping somebody else with their business, but to own a business and make big decisions on a regular basis, like it has to come from like a weird place in your gut.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah,
let me ask you a couple questions about that. So how many distributors does one have if you want to be national? Do you just need like a West Coast distributor and an East Coast distributor? How many do you
I think there's
work with?
1,000 ways to skin a cat. I have gotten to a point where I had more distributors prior than I do right now, because it became more important for me to consolidate into people who I felt were easy maintenance relationships, but also who moved enough wine. So, at some points I've like tried to have more and more and more, but like then I realized I don't want more and more and more. I mean, most of my distributor relationships are on autopilot. People re-up on a regular basis. I actually don't send any pushy allocation emails. I don't send an allocation email actually at all. When I'm releasing wine, I let people know how much wine I have and I sell it until it's gone. When I need somebody to buy wine, I will occasionally be like, hey, I need you to pick this up because I need to sell it. But I try to just be as like hands off and, but communicative as I can. Like people don't like when you're pushy with them. Like, and usually people who respond to pushiness, like to people who are like somebody who's going to respond the way you want them to real pushiness is probably not a person that I want to work with either. Like I like working with people who are good at their jobs and who have good taste. And that's like a whole different thing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So it's like I don't have a golden recipe. Like I really don't. I don't know. I could probably have like 15 or something. I also do a lot of business with the Montreal market, so through their SAQ, and then I have a private importer I work with there. Quebec.
How did you get started? Like what was your production when you got started, and at what point did you start bringing on distributors?
12 I made a barrel of wine, 13 I made like 350 cases, 14 I made about 1,000 cases, and I didn't start selling wine until the very end of 2016. So by the time I started selling wine, I guess I had like 1,400 cases of wine I was selling. but
Okay.
it was never hard for me to find distributors. Like I've actually only a few times in my life approached a distributor. And it's mainly been to make a
Okay.
change instead of finding somebody in a market. I mean, I believe again that like to go back to a relationship analogy, in a position like a distributor or producer, you want your distributor to want to work with you. You don't want to ever be a burden to them. You don't want to ever be bothering them to sell your wine. And the best place for that relationship to start is by them coming to you and asking to work with your wine.
Yeah.
Or, you know, in the
How did you attract distributors then?
Adam, I guess I'm just really cool. I have no idea.
That must be
I
it.
mean, I made really good wine. I guess it was affordable like in the beginning, or, you know, I don't even know if it
Okay.
was that.
Yeah,
Like, I don't
yeah.
even know if it was that. I think that I don't know what the
Well, how did
recipe
they hear
is.
about you? I mean,
Uh,
if you weren't selling wine, how did they hear about you?
Through friends. I mean, you know, I think that personal
Okay.
relationships are paramount. You know, like
Yeah. Yeah,
don't
absolutely.
do no
Okay.
harm. You know, like don't treat people like shit, and you know, but stand up for yourself and stand up for
Absolutely.
other people. I mean, again, it's not that there's definitely people out there, I'm sure, who don't like me, but I think there's very few people out there who can say that I fucked them over. And you
Yeah.
know, I also I like love humans to death. I mean, you know, I call like 30 different people my best friend, and that's sincere. You know, I'm not necessarily good in crowds or groups, but I really, really, really cherish and enjoy close relationships with people, and have a hard time knowing people on a superfluous level. So I think that's probably helped. You know, like having a good network of people who I sincerely care about and who sincerely care about me. And, you know, and I think the wines are good. And even though they were clunky to a degree in the beginning, because I was a new winemaker, I think thankfully there was at least enough promise, you know, that they were going to eventually become great wines. And I mean, I hope that I can achieve that at some point. Um, you know, I'm sure having good packaging helped at some point. I'm sure that I'm a lady. I hate to say it, probably attracted some people towards me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I can't, I can't quantify it. I mean, I think that it's like there's no thing that you'd be able to point to and be like, that's why. It's just, I think I was relentless. I know that I wasn't giving up. Plenty of people, you know, early in my career tried to push me out, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just
Okay.
I
No,
wasn't
that's
going
good.
anywhere. Like not in the sense of like I wasn't moving forward, but like I wasn't going to go away. Um,
Well,
and then, you
um,
know, that's something that we
no,
all
that's
have to
cool. Well,
remember is good wine is good wine. But at some point, you
yeah.
know, there is a storytelling element to wine. And this is something that, you know, again, fucking Steve Mathiasen said this to me one day. And I thought, because I was, when I was telling him I was deleting my Instagram, and he's like, well, how are you going to tell your story? And I'm like, well, I don't know. You know, I was like, oh yeah, and I'm going to write a book with one of my friends. You know, he's like, oh, okay, there you go. You know, like, but you know, it's like, let's like my icon, like if there was a deity at the center of my temple of wine, it would be La Rue Bisleroy. I have only had her wine a handful of times. I have never met her. I've never watched an interview with her. I've never read anything about her. But there's just something about the way that woman lives in this world that I love. I just fucking love her. Like, I don't know. Like, I can only imagine how witty she is. I can only imagine how cutting she is. I can only imagine how amazing her collection of beautiful Hermes scarves are. But I guarantee you that nobody has ever met her and forgotten about her. And I think that there's something about that that some
Mm,
people have, and I don't know if I have it or not. You know, I know that I've definitely met other people who do, and I think that that is an energy that we can't quantify or explain. And I think that if it carries over into your work as a creator of something, you know, it's a vibration. It's a thing. It's like I I don't know. I mean, you know, there's just people that you meet who who make beautiful things, and they amplify and carry that forward in who they are. And that's like one of the wonderful mysteries of the world that I never want to understand. Like the day you tell me that there's like a gene or, or a quantifiable entity that you can find that in another, in a human, I will be devastated. I will be like, you just took magic away from me.
I think you have that.
Well, I hope.
I can't wait
so.
to try what you're. What are you working on? I mean, what's the name that we should look for your new project there up north?
We are trying to get the name Lorelei, like the siren of the River Rhine.
Lorelei.
Yes.
Oh, beautiful! You're right on the river. Yes.
Yes, it's very windy. She killed sailors with her voice. It's great. But we'll see. There's a few other businesses with that name, and we'll be writing them letters to say we don't plan on interfering with your brewery or your beer bar, but we really like that name. We'd like to share it with you.
I love that name. We have a wine called Siren, so
cool.
Very much the name.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, I look forward to trying your wine, Adam.
Hey, I look forward to trying yours, Laura.
Thank you. And I hope that was not too rambly.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And
not at all. Thank you for doing this.
Look forward to connecting at some point.